This is from Henry in Buffalo, New York. I think every Christmas carries its own rhythm. Mine were always filled with love, family, and the smell of pine in the living room. But even with all that comfort, I used to feel a quiet gap inside, like something important was missing and I didn't know what. When I was a kid, I'd sit near the window and watch the snow fall on our street. I'd see families walking by, holding hands, talking and laughing. I had my own parents, but sometimes I wondered if someone else out there might look like me or think about me the same way. I was adopted when I was just a few months old. My parents told me early, and they always made me feel wanted. I never questioned their love. But as I got older, I started realizing that being loved doesn't erase the curiosity about where you came from. It just hides it for a while. Back then, adoption records were sealed. You couldn't just look up names or ask questions. My mom used to say, some things are better left alone, and I tried to accept that. But deep down, I always wanted to know who I was before I became me. Life moved forward. I got married, raised 2 kids, worked hard, paid bills, the normal routine. I never complained. But every Christmas morning, when my kids open their gifts, I catch myself wondering, who handed me mine on my very first Christmas? What kind of people were they? After I retired, the house got quiet. My wife had passed a few years earlier, and my kids had families of their own. One cold evening, while organizing old boxes, I came across a folder marked Adoption Papers. I hadn't seen it in decades. Just touching it made my heart beat faster. I opened it and found the name of the hospital where I was born. I'd driven past that building hundreds of times without realizing it was where my life began. It felt strange, like the past had been sitting just down the street all along, waiting for me to notice. A friend from church told me the state had recently changed the law. Adoptees could now request their original birth certificates. I shrugged it off at first, told him I was too old for surprises. But later that night, curiosity won. I sat down and filled out the request form. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. It was thin, official looking, and my hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a copy of my original birth certificate. For the first time, I saw my birth mother's name printed in black ink. My chest tightened just reading it. There was no father listed, just 2 initials. Still, it felt like a door had opened. Out of curiosity, I typed my mother's name and those initials into a search bar. I didn't expect anything to appear. But then an obituary came up with that exact combination. My stomach dropped. I spent the rest of that evening staring at the obituary on my screen. The last name matched. The town wasn't far from Buffalo. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Shock, guilt, excitement, maybe all of it mixed together. I clicked on the link and started reading. The man who'd passed away had a long list of family members. Children, grandchildren, even great-grandchildren. I whispered the names out loud. One of them might have been my brother or sister. It felt impossible to believe. I printed the obituary and carried it around for days. Every time I looked at it, I noticed something new, a middle name that sounded familiar, a town I'd once driven through. Each little detail pulled me closer to something I didn't fully understand yet. After a week of pacing and overthinking, I finally wrote a message to one of the names I'd found. I kept rewriting it, deleting sentences, trying not to sound like a scammer or a mistake. In the end, I just told the truth. I think we might be related. 2 days later, I got an email back. It was short, but kind. Her name was Margaret, and she said she'd been searching for a half-brother for years. She attached an old photo of their mom. When I opened it, I froze. Her eyes looked just like mine. Margaret explained that their mother had been very young when she got pregnant with me and was pressured into giving me up. She carried that guilt her whole life. Reading that broke something open in me. Sadness and relief tangled together. We started exchanging emails, then phone calls. Every conversation felt easy, like talking to someone I'd known forever. She'd tell me little things, how their mom loved to sing while cooking, how their dad joked too much, and I could almost hear those sounds in my head. After a few weeks, Margaret said she and her brother Frank wanted to meet me. She asked if I'd be willing to come up to Rochester before Christmas. I hesitated, thinking maybe it was too soon. But she said softly, "Mom always wanted you home for the holidays." That sentence hit me hard. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my coffee, until it went cold. I'd spent 75 years celebrating Christmas with people I loved. It felt like this one would finally show me where I truly belonged. So I said yes. We planned to meet the weekend before Christmas. As I packed a small bag, I kept thinking about how strange life can be. How you can live a whole story, then suddenly find a missing chapter waiting near the end. Studies show that most adults adopted as infants describe their search for birth family as more about identity than loss. They're not trying to replace anyone. They're trying to understand the missing pieces of their own story. The morning of the trip, Buffalo was covered in snow. I left before sunrise. The roads quiet except for the hum of the tires. I kept glancing at the passenger seat, where I'd placed a small gift, a framed photo of me as a baby. I figured it might help them feel closer to the brother they never met. The closer I got to Rochester, the more nervous I became. My heart felt like it was thudding in my throat. I didn't know what to say or what to expect. How do you greet family you've technically known for only a few emails? I parked outside the small coffee shop we'd agreed on. Through the window, I saw a woman and a man waiting near the corner table, both watching the door every few seconds. When I stepped inside, Margaret gasped and whispered, "That's him." For a moment, none of us moved. Then she stood up and hugged me so tightly that it almost knocked the air out of my chest. I felt her shoulders shake, and suddenly, I realized mine were shaking too. We didn't need words. The silence said enough. We spent hours talking about our families, childhoods, and everything we'd missed. They showed me photos of birthdays and vacations, and I showed them pictures of my kids. The similarities were everywhere. The same smile, the same odd sense of humor. It was like meeting old friends you somehow already loved. When Margaret showed me a picture of our mother holding her firstborn, I just stared. Her eyes were kind, and her smile looked so familiar. "She never forgot you," Margaret said quietly. I touched the photo and whispered, "I think I never forgot her either." I spent that night at Margaret's house. It was small and cozy, filled with the smell of coffee and pine candles. The next morning, I woke up to laughter in the kitchen, the sound of people who already felt familiar. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering where I fit in. I was already there. The table was covered in pancakes, cinnamon rolls, and too many mugs of coffee. Frank joked that they hadn't had this many people around on Christmas morning in years. I told them it felt strange to be both a guest and family at the same time. Margaret smiled and said, "That's how it's supposed to feel." After breakfast, I gave them the small box I'd brought. Inside were 3 framed photos, one of me as a baby, one of Margaret and Frank as kids, and one blank frame in the middle labeled for Mom. Margaret cried quietly and hugged me again. "It's complete now," she said. Later, as snow began to fall outside, we sat by the window and watched the sky turn pale gray. I thought about all the Christmases I'd lived through, good ones, lonely ones, quiet ones, and realized they had all been leading to this one. Sometimes, life waits for the right season to give you what you've been missing. I don't know if miracle is the right word, but I do know that family has a way of finding you when you least expect it. Maybe that's what Christmas is really about, not the gifts or the lights, but the second chances. If this story spoke to you, please like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, consider subscribing.